Good morning. It's December the 5th, 2009. My name is Gary Wittenberger. This is my friend Furkan. And today is the fourth session of the debate that we began several weeks ago, primarily in regard to the existence of God. We want to thank those of you who have been watching our debate on YouTube. We've had quite a few hits to the particular website or the particular channel that we've been using. One thing that we did notice, however, is that some people are viewing the first and perhaps second parts of a session and also the last part of a session, but skipping over the middle parts of the session. We would encourage everyone to watch all the parts of each session in sequence so that you can get the maximum understanding and maximum benefit from the debate. One of our viewers mentioned in a comment that our audio recording is not being presented through two channels, through two speakers. And we've noticed that that is the case, and we are going to try to do something in the future to overcome that deficit. But for now, we'll just go with the one channel of audio. We did see that the volume of the audio was pretty good last time, and so we think that we found the reasonable level of the volume that makes the debate able to be heard by everyone. At the end of last session, we were talking about an analogy which Furkan had presented, and this analogy involved several elements. One was sand, which he used to represent the substance of the universe. And secondly, the wind, which he used to represent energy in the universe, or change in the universe, or power, or the dynamic quality of the universe. And third, sticking properties of the sand, which he used to represent the properties of atoms in the universe, which combine with one another in different ways, in fact, in lawful, regular ways. And in his analogy, he imagined that wind was pushing around sand and producing very complex structures of sand in a very short period of time. I was willing to accept his analogy to some extent. The one thing that did not fit well with our knowledge of the universe was the fact that in his analogy, the wind produced these complex structures in a very short period of time, whereas in our universe, it has taken 13.7 billion years to produce the complex structures we see in the world today. So I think that is one deficit of the analogy. What I'm going to ask Furkan to do is to build upon that simple analogy and tell how his belief in God is related to it. In other words, how does God fit into the analogy? What would the analogy look like if he added the element of God? So with that introduction, I'm going to turn on our timer so that we can get the ball rolling here. And I'll now turn it over to Furkan.
Okay, I think you did an excellent introduction. Thank you for that, and I will try to answer your question. But with that, I think also one of our audience posted a comment after listening our discussion that we did last time. the comment was this: he was saying that, okay, referring, I think, implying what I did and kind of making fun of what I said or what I did in the last program, and saying I prove my case by a bag of sand and a little bit ignorance of physics, basic physics. So I think the point was quite clear. Basically, this individual was saying that using such analogy in just using the wind and sand analogy in explaining the complex process of the evolvement or development of the creation of the universe is not acceptable. That's really, it seems like that person really has more knowledge of physics particularly, and he was saying that you don't really understand physics, so that's why you kind of talking as an ignorant person. And I think he was particularly referring to me because I was the one basically bringing this analogy. I think, is ironically, I kind of assume that that person might be in your team, in your side, and basically thinking that really there's a complex process explained by science isn't enough explanation, and we don't really need to include God in this process. I think, ironically, if that audience really think through his comment, he will find the answer through his comment. His comment is at the same time is the answer that he is looking for. Here's what I mean. Basically, I don't claim that just the universe is really the result of sand and wind, and I don't claim just there was nothing else other than the wind and sand. After all, we use just an analogy, and analogy, I think, is a reasonable one to understand a complex process. But what I wanted to say that you cannot explain this complex arrangement of the basic elements just through the energy and the basic elements themselves. So you have to have a room for intelligent being who will make this arrangement. Now this audience by this comment is basically confirming me and saying that you're right, so I will explain next time how.
Okay, I appreciate the comment of one of our viewers about you're lacking a knowledge of physics, and that's why you're not getting to the truth of the matter here. However, I think that what we're trying to do is actually capture physics within the analogy. In our analogy, the sand refers to the basic particles of the universe. Now, of course, you wanted to say there's only one type of particle, whereas in reality there may be as many as 100 or more different basic particles. But for purposes of analogy, I was willing to grant you that and just say there are basic particles in the universe. We don't know exactly how many different kinds there are, but there are these kinds of basic particles. Also, when we talked about the stickiness properties of the sand, those are actually representing the laws of physics. The laws of physics say if you do X, then Y will happen. And what we're merely saying is that these particles of sand we're imagining to stick together in certain ways, not in random ways, but only in certain ways. Maybe a particle of sand of certain size will stick to another particle of sand of a certain size at a certain angle. So these properties of stickiness that we're talking about represent or stand for the laws of physics. So let's not confuse analogy with reality. What you're presenting is an analogy to try to simplify things and help us understand the nature of reality. So I have no problem with your analogy as long as it reflects fairly well what is real. That's why I didn't like the part about quickly producing complex objects, because as far as we know, that did not happen. For example, the first living thing on Earth took about 10 billion years to produce from the time of the Big Bang. So what I'm trying to get at now is how you're going to bring in intelligence into this analogy. In other words, what does this intelligence do in the analogy? And I'd like to see where you go with that.
Yeah, I think that's